Hey, what's up everyone? I wanted to make a quick video today with some tips and tricks for anyone who's just getting started sewing leather on an industrial machine. I'm not going to get into anything technical that is unique to a specific machine. Everything I'm talking about today is just going to be kind of a generalization for industrial machines and specifically sewing leather. If you have a question about your specific machine, I would suggest looking it up on YouTube because I know there are very specific videos for almost every type of machine out there that instruct you how to thread it and take care of problems and adjust it and things like that. I've bought a lot of different sewing machines, and almost every single machine I've dealt with, I've been able to find some kind of tutorials on it. So this isn't that kind of video. This video should be helpful if you're hoping to learn how to sew wallets, belts, some accessory pieces. So let's dive in. So anytime you're about to sew leather, it's always smart to add in an edge guide, which has a twofold benefit. This is a craft tool edger from Tandy. These are pretty affordable, and you can find a Tandy almost anywhere. I'll show you how to do it in just a minute after I move the camera, but the purpose of this is to, one, give you a nice guideline for where the needle needs to go as you're sewing, but it also creates a deep groove in the leather and allows the stitches to sit inside of the groove so that it's not exposed and won't get snagged on things. So I'll go over using an edge guide, thread types and thread sizes, little tips and tricks while you're sewing to keep it from getting jammed and things like that. Back stitching, potential problems that might come up. So I'm gonna try and keep this as short and quick as possible while still being somewhat helpful. So I'm actually gonna be using this edge guide backwards because I'm left-handed. It's okay, it just doesn't cut in as deep of a groove as you would normally do it if you were right-handed. But I just push in a little bit so I get somewhat of a groove, but also I get my guideline in there. So you just want to go all the way around your piece, around the corners. And there we go. We've got a nice little groove line going all the way around the edge, so that I'm going to keep my needle dropping into that groove the whole way around, and by the time you're done, it'll look pretty uniform and straight and clean. I want to talk about thread type. I'm using a 92 weight thread. When I started out, I was using 207, which is pretty heavy, and I was doing that on my cowboy harness stitcher. And I realized that was a little bit of overkill for a wallet. And the smaller I went with my thread and the smaller needle I went, the cleaner the stitch looked and the better it stayed together. It just became really strong. I'm using 92 weight right now, but I've been considering going down to 69 just because I really like the subtlety in a stitch. I want all the focus of our products to be on the leather and not the stitch. Anyway, that's just a personal preference, but I do like to use bonded nylon. I'll put a link down in the description from where I buy it. I buy it from the Thread Exchange. They've got a huge variety of thread for industrial machines. They've got every color you want, every weight. I'll put a link down in the description so you can pick some up. Okay, so this is a shoulder pad for my shoulder straps on my bag. I just figured it'd be a good little piece to demonstrate this on because it's got some round corners. It's got some nice straight edges. One little tip that I tend to use a lot is I like to use my presser foot as my edge guide. Even if you have this line grooved into your leather, it helps to keep an eye on the edge of your presser foot right here. And I line the edge of my leather up with the edge of the presser foot right there. That way, you know, you're getting about an 1/8 of an inch gap from the edge of your leather to the needle. And as long as you have little guides like that in place, you don't need an actual roller guide. Okay, so I normally don't like to start on a rounded section, but I do like to find opportunities where I can start and stop the stitch in an area that won't be seen in general use. Like for instance, this is going to have a 1-inch strap coming out and it'll cover this section right here. So I'm going to start and stop it right here. I'll just start right in the middle, drop my foot down. One thing that I was never told when I got started sewing, and I wish I would have known, was that you really have to keep the tension tight on your threads as you start sewing. That way it's going to keep it from pulling that thread down into your bobbin case and getting jammed. So you want to keep the tension tight as you start for like 2 stitches. After you get 2 stitches into it, you can let go and then back stitch and you should be good to go. So I'm going to do 1, 2 stitches there, drop it down, And what I've found is that you want to drop the needle down all the way until it starts coming back up again, just slightly. And that should set the timing just right for it to backstitch properly. So now you backstitch 2 and then go forward 2. And now I can just keep moving along all the way around. And remember, you don't want to spin it unless the needle's inside the leather. Otherwise, you're going to ruin the timing. So once you get to a straight spot, you can start... Oh, what? Okay, so that's pretty crazy. This doesn't normally happen. This isn't like a common thing, but I was just sewing along, but my thread broke. Probably heard it. It popped on the top end. That's really frustrating. I pulled my thread out. What that tells me is that there was something too tight going on up here. The tension was so tight that it just broke. So I started looking around at my route. I get to over here and it looks like this thread right here had wrapped around and got caught on something over there. And so that's not meant to be that way. That'll throw your whole tension off the machine, the top end. So that's unfortunate. It's a real bummer, especially when I'm making a video. But I thought about just starting over, but I'm going to use it as a teaching opportunity instead. Those are little things you have to look out for as you're sewing. Usually before you get started sewing, it's smart to look around and make sure everything's in place where it needs to be, because you don't want to have to stop in the middle of your stitch and then start again. It's kind of a pain. So I got it fixed. It's all threaded properly now. I'm going to keep going with my stitch. I'm going to start a few holes back so that I can lock in the end of that stitch just so that it doesn't come loose later on. So I'll start back here. Stitch a couple times. I'll probably back stitch it just to be safe. I don't think you really need to, but I like to overdo it just to make sure nothing comes apart down the road. I'm going to sew right along my line. One thing I do want to mention though, is around these corners, the reason I'm able to slow it down so much without having to hand crank every single one is because of my speed reducer. And I've talked about this in other videos, but if you're going to sew leather, I would highly recommend getting a speed reducer. That's this big gear right here. I installed this. It's an aftermarket part. It slows the speed down on the machine, but it also adds more torque. And that way you can slow it way down. Sometimes I still hand crank it though, just to be safe, because you don't want to mess up a whole project that you're working on just because you weren't careful enough. Okay, little tip that I want to give that is not applied to this project specifically, but if you ever have to make a 90-degree turn or pivot on a sharp corner, you always want to take your needle all the way down and then till it's just coming up about 1/4 of an inch. Then you can turn your piece around and start again without it skipping a stitch. I'm gonna bring my needle down right there and try and line it up with the last hole so that it just seems seamless. And now I'm going to go backwards, back 1 stitch. Now I can't use my reverse on this just because in order to line it up with the last stitch, I kind of shortened the length of my stitch. So I'm just going to do this by hand and finish it off. Now I just back stitched 1, 2 backwards and then 2 forwards. I'm going to go back 2 again just to, maybe it's overkill, but again, I just want to make sure that it's, even if it comes unraveled a little bit, we still have a lot of strength holding it together. So then you want to pull your piece all the way out. You want to give yourself quite a bit of leeway here, and I'll show you why. Okay, so the reason you want to leave a lot of thread hanging out like this is so you have some leverage to pull the knot into the middle of the leather. So you can see when I ended, I've got my loop kind of sticking out right here. You don't want to end it like that. You want to pull the knot in between the 2 pieces so that it's sitting right in the middle. So you can see it's not sticking out on this side or on this side. The intersecting part of the two pieces of thread is directly in the middle of that leather. So that's what you want to do to end it. And then you can just snip these off, burn it, and you're good to go. But I'm going to also do that where I started my stitch. Bring it right into the middle. And then you can snip it. Just snip it as close as you can to the leather. And then I'm going to burn the areas where I started and stopped. You don't want to go crazy with it. You just want to singe it so that it doesn't start fraying and coming undone. Sometimes I even let the ends get kind of hot and waxy and smear it down like that. And that'll like really melt it into itself so that it won't come unraveled. So there we go. We got a finished stitched shoulder strap. So just a couple really quick things before I wrap this up. If your machine ever jams for any reason, you want to get into your bobbin case, pull out your bobbin, and just start clipping out all the thread that you can find in there. You don't want to try and force or pull anything because you could break parts in there. Some things are pretty delicate. So if it's really jammed and you can't even get to anything to clip, you can start taking it apart. I've got some little screwdrivers. And I'll start taking this piece apart. Every machine's different, but start taking things apart till you can get this whole bobbin case free and away from everything. Pull all the thread out. You might have to get a little mechanical with it and figure out how it works, but don't ever force it. Just do whatever you can to free up the thread and then re-thread it when you're done and try and go again. If you look at your stitch when you're done and you notice that the knot isn't sinking down into the middle, it could probably be on either side. It mostly happens on the back side, but if you start to see the little nubbins from the knot from not being pulled down into the middle of the leather, it's because your tension's wrong. So you might want to tighten it up a little up here. Just mess with it, tweak it. My machine's a little weird because I've got 2 tension discs, which is kind of unique. Usually you just have the one. So you have to do these kind of at the same time and together to get it right. But anyway, mess with your tension until your stitch looks good on both sides and that the knot is being put right in the middle. Again, that's kind of a technical thing, so I'm not going to go into it too much because every machine's different. But tension's one of those things, you may have to mess with it a little bit at first when you first set up your machine, but I rarely mess with my tension. It's almost always right where it needs to be. So get it right and then don't stress about it too much. Another thing to look for is the marks from the presser foot on the leather. It does pretty good on this piece. You can't see too much evidence of the presser foot on this leather. But sometimes you'll sew up a wallet and you'll see some deep tracks from the presser foot. If that's the case, most machines have a little tension screw. Okay. If that's the case, most machines have a tension screw up here, and I've got mine backed up all the way possible because it's releasing the tension of a spring that's in here. That spring right there is what's putting tension on your presser foot. So most of the time with leather, I would think in most cases with leather, you want as much tension freed up from that as possible. Well, in most cases with leather, you want to back that up as much as possible so you're not getting too much tension on the leather because it can really mess up your leather and make it look pretty rough if you don't do that. Also, as another little tip, try swapping out your presser foot. I've got one, you can't see it underneath, but the bottom of it is smooth. Kind of like this one. Okay. So this is the presser foot that I removed from it. It's got those teeth on it. I took this one off and installed that one, which is completely smooth on the bottom. And thanks to that, I don't get all the track marks on my leather. So that was one thing that helped with that, made it look really good. There's a couple things you might have to mess with and dink around with, but just so you know, there's always going to be some kind of evidence of sewing machine marks on the leather. It's pretty impossible to get rid of it completely. And one last thing I want to mention, if you ever start having weird noises or problems with your machine, always make sure that it's oiled up. The frequency that you oil it will differ depending on how much you use it. I use my machine all day, every day, so I usually oil it about every other day. So look up the details on your machine and find each oiling point. Keep it really nice and lubed up. And that way, you're not going to have any long-term problems with your machine. That pretty much sums it up. I hope I covered some basic points to help you get started sewing. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.